Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome back to the second day of the IPI World Congress. We're thinking of today really as Tech Thursday. And earlier today we had a conversation between Maria Ressa of Rappler in the Philippines and Gada Awais of Al Jazeera, where they talked of their personal experience with online harassment and really looking at the strategy of the trolls to silence journalists, particularly journalists, and the role that the platforms are playing in enabling those kind of attacks and harassment. So look for that. That'll be online in the coming days and weeks in different formats for you to take a look at that story. And now we have the big tech platforms, their distribution and discovery, their promotion, they're our friends, they're our enemy. And on top of all of that, they're a story. They're one of the biggest stories of our time. And it seems like we can't live with them and we can't live without them. And so today we've drawn together three of journalism's big thinkers and writers about platforms. And in New York, we have Emily Bell, who's the founding director of the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia School of Journalism. In Istanbul, we have Emre Kizilkaya, who's the IPI Turkey National Committee Vice Chair and also the project editor of journalism.com.tr. And over in the California Bay Area, we have David Cohen, co-founder of Subtext, who'll be leading the conversation as well as sharing some of his own perspectives. So I'm going to hand over now to you, David.
Cool. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for attending. We're going to start with a conversation mostly between Emily and Emre. I will participate as well, but I also want to mention, it is Zoom. There is a chat box. I'll be, checking the chats. So, we're going to leave time for questions and a conversation between all of us, but you can start sending the questions whenever they pop in, whenever inspiration comes. I'll also point out, I'm going to try and play a little bit of a devil's advocate during this conversation. The question as posed is, platforms, friend or foe, and maybe frenemy as a third choice. And not that I want to put words into Emily or Emre's mouths, but I have a strong sense that there's going to be a sense of foe being the argument. I think that's an argument that I could make as well, but I'm going to try and push back on that at times. So just in full transparency, I will be trying to make the case that they are our friend if it feels as though the case is overwhelmingly being made that they are our foe. I'm going to start with Emily, actually, to give us kind of a bigger picture of what's going on, and then follow up with Emre to give us kind of a local, how things appear to him from Turkey. So Emily, I'll just repose the panel question to you. Big tech platforms, friend, foe, or frenemy?
Well, it's a complicated question, Dave. And I think that, as you were saying, I think we're going to get a sense from me and Emre that we think of the platforms as foe. And I've tried really hard as a researcher and a journalist to sort of remove myself from that perspective, to try and think through this really complicated relationship. So at the Tao Center, we've done research over the past 5 years, which looks precisely at the relationship of newsrooms and bigger platforms. So, kind of starting about 2015, where they had a big rollout, which you'll remember, of publishing tools, which was the first time the platform said, we are really going to be much more involved in how news gets not just distributed, but actually how it is published on our platform. So you had everything from Snapchat Discover to Facebook Instant Articles to Google AMP to Apple News, all launching, Twitter Moments, all launching in 1 year. So I think kind of, over the last 5 years, you've actually had, a real kind of concerted effort from the platforms to say, we are an active ingredient in this. We want to be partners with news production. So what I'm sort of trying to evaluate on it, not are they our enemy or our friend, but how well are they doing that? So wait, Dave, I think that they kind of suck at it. And at the moment, the real problem that we have is that they are in control of our news environment. They're in control of a lot of the economics. They're in control of a huge amount of the attention. And they really do have a responsibility, not necessarily to the news industry, but certainly to communities, to provide high quality, reliable information and to make it pretty easy to find. And I think that that's where they really struggle on two fronts, one of which is just getting their heads around the concept that if they don't want to be totally overrun by misinformation and disinformation, what have you, and they are, you know, this is what it feels like to lose a disinformation war. You know, it's kind of like they have set themselves up as to fight misinformation. They're losing. We're all losing. So the first thing they have to do is really kind of adjust how they think about, you know, integrity of information and what they're going to do to promote it. And the second thing that they have to do is really think hard, or we have to regulate them into thinking hard about what kind of information society we want. So the frenemy question is, do we think that what we have at the moment is as good as it can get? And I think it's nowhere near acceptable. You know, it's threatening people's human rights and their lives in some cases. It's threatening to whole areas of entity reporting in smaller organizations. It's got everything wrong in terms of an environment that really supports what I would call high quality journalism, you know, whether it's at local level, you know, whether it's at national or international level. Sure, there are some amazing things that we can now do as journalists because of the technology platforms and because of the way we can publish. But from a citizen's point of view, I think we're a long, long way from this being a beneficial reform of what we do. And I think our task is really to say, how can that be better? And what can we do about that very difficult relationship between the platforms and the publishers?
Okay, that's a good kind of opening framing for us. And I want to pass it to Emre, but before I do, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, just so everyone knows, we've had small email exchanges here. Emre, my impression from Emily just now is, my favorite line was, you know, maybe they can be our friend, but they just suck at it. And my impression from our email chains, at least, Emre, from you, was that you have a slightly, you know, more skeptical or view of platforms, that maybe they are actually being nefarious in certain ways. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Let me pass it to you. And you know, do you see platforms here as friend, foe, or frenemy within, you know, the media ecosystem that you're experiencing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think conceptually, when we are talking about friends and enemies, I think there can be two levels. This terminology can be used either in a war, military sense, or in personal relationships, emotional relationships, for instance. In this regard, we are talking about commercial entities. So the talk should be more about the public life, the public sphere, versus the other interests, like commercial interests, I think. And in the specific example of Turkey, as I headed the digital edition of Turkey's most popular news website until 2 years ago, both Google and Facebook were, of course, our friends. Why? For instance, I was the one who started the first ever regular Facebook Live show for a news website in Turkey. I was making our columnists meet with our readers on Facebook Live regularly, twice a week. Or we were the first ones who used Google's AMP pages, which really boosted our mobile traffic hugely. So their products, their formats, their platforms were definitely an opportunity for us. They were presenting an opportunity for us. But at the same time, as a citizen, I was always skeptical about the ways in which these platforms can affect the public discourse and the public interest as a whole. In Turkey, we are not in a normal country. It's like, you know, out of all the G20 countries, there are only a few ones that blocked YouTube, Twitter, even some Google services, and right now over 400,000 websites. And at the same time, we are jailing journalists. Dozens of journalists are in Turkish jails now. And we are Hungary. Erdogan government is taking control of the opposition media, the critical media, through his allies in other business sectors. So they are buying the media outlets not for profits, but to get other grants for areas like public tenders in energy sector. So they are ready to lose money in the media sector. They are sacrificing it. So it is changing the balance on every level, you know, digital disruption on one side, technology and business, and on the other side, this huge public pressure. That's why Turkey is kind of in a unique environment, and these platforms should be even more careful in treating the information sphere in such countries, but we don't see it, especially with Google and Facebook right now in Turkey. But perhaps I can go into detail later.
Well, actually, as a quick follow-up, you know, and again, coming at this from an outsider, we sort of pose this question between platforms and media, but you just brought in as well, there's the government and government actors. So now we're in sort of like a three-way standoff. You know, how do you see the relationship between big tech and government, which again is different from country to country, but like again in Turkey, how do you see that playing out? And is media caught in the middle of that? Are you to the side? How does that trifecta play?
This is when we are looking to the United States, the platform like Facebook and Google and others are taking some steps back because of public pressure or the potential of more government scrutiny, more regulation, etc. But in Turkey, the public pressure is not big. Most people do not even know how Google works or how Facebook's algorithm works. They do not put any pressure on these digital giants. That's why these digital platforms are more interested in their public relations mindset on their relationship with the government, Turkish government, not the Turkish public. Because there is no pressure from the public side, they want to have good relations with the government. For instance, Facebook had been censoring content, removing content from pages. I will give you just one example. There was one woman who had a video, a Facebook Live, and on the background there was three colors, blue, red, and green, and Facebook removed that just because of that. It was not the flag of a terrorist organization or something. The PKK, for instance, had another kind of flag. It's just three colors that are associated with the Kurdish people. So even without the government's request, Facebook was so eager to remove such content because they don't want their head to be in trouble. Similarly, right now, Google is giving a lot of boost to the pro-government media and down-ranking the critical media, search engines, and on other products like YouTube, for instance.
Interesting. Let me see if I can back into the conversation again from the point of view of the user experience, actually, of big tech platforms. I'm going to use Facebook here, and it differs from platform to platform, but I think you will both get my point, which is the news feed of Facebook is a misnomer. They call it a news feed, but really it is a feed where people create, at least this is my perception of it, their personal identity. And you create your personal identity online through content. Here's something that represents me. And news organizations, when they got into bed, so to speak, with platforms, changed their editorial goal from informing the public to giving the public content that they can then signal their identity, right? So I worked at AJ Plus for a while, and you know, we used to say, you know, you're not writing the headline to inform your audience, but to inform your audience's friends, right? So you're writing the headline not to tell them about the world, but so that they can tell their friends about who they think they are, right? I am this kind of person. And that shift, news organizations essentially change their editorial. Now that's at a very, or user-centric perspective. Imre, what you're talking, we're talking now at the level of this. And this goes to Emily, your point. I think you said in 2015, I think you said was the year that platforms became public. And again, they didn't become public necessarily. Certainly, they didn't proclaim it, but they in the business of acquiring content from publishers to power that engine. Now, on the positive side, platforms give publishers access to the largest audience in human history, right? And that's not an exaggeration, right? So I'll say it again. Publishers have access to the largest audience in human history, which, when you just say it like that, it sounds like it should be a boom, right? Something fantastic for everybody. I guess I'm trying to wonder, where do we think things got off the tracks, right? Because there is this, and the entire internet, right, which feels like it's off the tracks, started with such gusto and almost had I'll use an American sort of analogy here, but had sort of like this hippie peace and love kind of vibe to it in the early days, and now it feels somewhat dystopic. Where do we think things went wrong? And is there a way to put the genie back in the bottle or not? Again, I'll start with Emily.
So I think you put your finger on it there, Dave, when you were saying, you reach the biggest audiences in the history of humanity through just, a tweet or a post on Facebook. That's where it all went wrong. I mean, so the first thing is scale and connectivity and being sold as an inherent good, no matter what. Remove the friction, allow things to travel as far as possible. And I always default to one of the laws in economics known as Gresham's law, which is when you are a completely free market with no regulation whatsoever, bad money, in other words, bad actors, always drives out good money. Like the people who will be the least scrupulous will always dominate in an unregulated environment. So once you made scale the single most important performance metric for the platforms, that was the moment that this all completely started, sort of was derailed. So you could argue, well, maybe that was like in 2002, or maybe it was in 2005, or perhaps it was in 2012. I mean, a great moment to think about is the addition of the share button on Facebook to mobile phones. I was talking to some fact checkers who said, our job was pretty stable, started to really grow with social media, but we knew as soon as they put the share button on Facebook's mobile platform, our jobs went crazy. We just saw this enormous. So I think all of these kind of design little things that we don't think about as being really key to the future of not just news, but of democracy, ability to share, ability to kind of the monetization of likes and shares. So that fundamental design of go as far as possible, collect as much data as possible, that that was where it really sort of went wrong. There were points at which we could have maybe stopped it. And there are many of them. First of all, like Facebook should never have been allowed to buy Instagram, should never have been allowed to buy WhatsApp. We had, I think, kind of too much trust as journalists, or rather maybe too much desperation or too much greed in embracing those relationships with platforms and saying they will be our saviors. We've seen all sorts of new kind of models. I mean, Dave, I always think about you in this context as being one of the kind of key pioneers of new types of platform technology for journalism. And I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like doing good innovation was made so much harder actually by platforms than it should have been. And actually doing bad innovation, like spreading kind of spammy, cheap fakes, kind of fake news, whatever, became just exponentially easier. And I think the problem was that in about 2013-14, when this was clearly a problem, the platforms just went into both denial mode, this is not us and not our responsibility, which was, I think, negligent of them. And, you know, kind of, even when they acknowledged that they had responsibility for it, they haven't done anything, as Emre was saying, you know, they haven't protected journalistic freedom. They haven't made it possible for people to employ more reporters. They haven't, you know, they're not really in the news sector in that sense. You know, they don't have an interest in making kind of an environment where independent journalism could thrive. So I think we've had like it's been like a 20-year journey where, you know, kind of it's been clear we've gone from, as you say, like the optimistic stuff in about 2005, hey, great, like democratization of voices, I mean, you know, to the dystopian stuff now. Stop this. In amongst the good thing, if you like, is that we do hear, and I'm borrowing this from Ethan, who said this the other, on the webinar we were having at CJR. He said we do hear from just a lot, like a much wider range of people than we used to, and that's a good thing. But it's kind of, I think that is now also in recession, right? So I think even the good things are now in recession. So there does need to be some, I think, sort of really kind of rapid triage and regulation.
Interesting. And then Imre, to switch it to you, I'll pose this question, but if you have other thoughts, feel free to, you know, go with what's on your mind. But picking up from Emily in terms of triage, right? You're, again, you know, in Turkey, it sounds and it feels much more like a precarious situation. So triage and, like, you know, how to walk back from the precipice. From your point of view, do you see any room to move? I mean, what potential, you know, in the US, there's, you know, they talk about everything from, like, you know, regulation, monopoly, breaking up to, you know, but, you know, for you, what movement do you see, do you feel, or do you just feel like the walls are closing in and there's nowhere to go?
Where democratic institutions are strong or mind for such a long time, like in Turkey, of course, it's much harder places where democratic institutions are in a better position to protect the public interest. As Emily said, the mobile devices boom or smartphone boom was one of the milestones, but I think that the problem started in 1998 when Google was founded and in 2004 when Facebook was founded. These two had been so successful, commercially successful, in organizing information and sending it to the advertisers at scale, that others also started to see them as, you know, big examples, great examples, good role models in a, you know, profit motivation way. I don't mean the public, I don't mean the citizen. So there is a what's called Collingridge dilemma. A British academic had coined this phrase, it's so old, it's from the 80s. He's basically saying that it's actually an older concept, but he framed it in a very well way. He says that there are two problems in technology: information problem and power problem. Information problem is that some impacts cannot be easily predicted until that technology is adopted by masses and very well developed. So when Google was founded in the 90s, for instance, we were not able to comprehend these potential impacts. That's why the regulators, the public, were so silent for a long time. And then comes the power problem. When the control or the change is difficult, the technology is so strong that you cannot change it. Right now, it's really hard to regulate these. And in countries like Turkey, it's even harder because the public is also, for instance, less digitally literate, although they are more tech savvy. What I mean is that Turks use phones, smartphones, much more than Europeans and Americans. They are using it more frequently, they are engaged more, they are spending more on buying the newest models, although they are much poorer, interestingly. But at the same time, they are not digitally literate, even as the average American. So here the threshold is actually low, and Turkey is lowest of the low. That's why in Turkey, journalists' work is really much harder. Not only this public pressure, but you have to fight these digital giants, but at the same time, the illiterate public as well.
That's interesting. Again, I want to try and play devil's advocate here, and see if either of you think there are ways to work with the platforms. I'll go with something that is very, maybe surface level, but obvious, which is money. Because certainly Facebook and Google, I don't know all that, GNI and FBI, Google is throwing money here, Facebook is throwing money here. I mean, again, from my perspective, I see a lot of money flowing from them to publishers. I actually was talking with an academic publisher who's writing about, ONA, the Online News Association, another organization, their yearly conference, I don't think it would be able to happen without money from Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc. And without that, I think that lack of conference would be a loss for the community, and that's just within the community, not let alone the publishers directly to publish. So, do we take their money? And if so, does that make us complicit? Put us more in the frenemy position of we are competing with them, but we have to work with them. Again, I'll pass it to you two, and I'm open to other ways that you think we could work with them. That just seems like the most blunt is they're giving out money, let's take it.
Well, so we're doing a couple of big research projects on this right now, and one of the things that we have is a huge spreadsheet of all of the grants that Facebook and Google have given out. Two things to say, one of which is it's a very small sum of money compared to their overall revenues. So we may think of it as a large amount, but it's like $100 million each or something a year. The second thing is it's really hard to trace. They don't kind of publish everything, single kind of dollar they give away. And news organizations don't disclose either, even ones that actually sometimes have an obligation to disclose. What's been interesting is we've been interviewing a wide range of people who take this kind of money, and we kind of encountered two views. One of which are, so first of all, the view is they are trying to help, and good things can come from this, and the money is available and it's not coming from anywhere else. So we are, going to go ahead. The other view, if you like, is this is not necessarily going to help the field. I mean, I have strong views about it, which is I think that what's happened is they've really kind of created a massive problem in terms of civic information. And they are sprinkling a tiny amount of a public relations budget, which is devolving to newsrooms and to people in academia as well, to sort of to quieten everyone down and say exactly what you said, Dave, which is, hey, they're giving away money, they must be our friends, they're trying to work on this, etc. There are 3 or 4 things they could change in their business models instantly, which would give everybody in publishing a lot more money and would be incredibly equitable. We've seen in Australia what happens when you introduce legislation that says you must pay publishers, not you choose to pay publishers, but you must pay publishers. And what they've said is we're just going to withdraw any kind of news product, any news present, we're not going to have news on our platform, which of course is an absurd thing to say because people just create things which are not real news. So it's sort of, everybody we've interviewed, whether they are favorably disposed to the platforms or suspicious of the platforms, has said the same thing, which is the reason they are giving money out is essentially PR. It's marketing. It's to change people's minds about them. And so from that point of view, and I think, kind of academics are complicit in this, I think newsrooms, I have more sympathy for newsrooms because I think it's really hard. You want to keep the lights on and somebody turns up with a check for $100,000, as Facebook is doing in the coronavirus pandemic. You take the money and you do what you can for your, but we shouldn't get into a position where they are allowed to redefine the field on their terms. And that's the thing that I'm worried about, which is they've created this problem and now they're kind of involving themselves in how they sort it out, because there isn't anything else. I mean, that's the other thing. This is not just their problem. This is our failing as an industry. It's the failing of regulation in, you know, certain countries, and it's, you know, the kind of pressure that you get that Emre described in places where, you know, actually there isn't a kind of huge interest in maintaining a free press. So finding alternative methods to remake journalism, which does not involve the platforms, I think, or their money or their money given in the way they want to, I think is really important. And we're in a bad place, I think, with that at the moment.
Imre, I'll pass it to you. Do you take Facebook or Google's money, and or if they extend other opportunities, how would you work with them in a way that you feel is beneficial, or is that just off the table?
I think I agree with Emily that it's mostly PR for most of these organizations. Of course, it should be evaluated case by case, company by company. But for instance, when we are talking about Google's GNI, I know that their intentions with that GNI fund good, whether it's PR or not, was good. Compared to Facebook, they are, Google, I mean, is journalism with two others, much Facebook. They are not as good as Twitter in protecting speech, especially in Turkey. For instance, Twitter is resisting to remove content if it's free speech, but Facebook is just removing content whenever the government wants. About the funds, you know, GNI, for instance, for the first time they funded a newsroom and they are my employee whom actually bought the newspaper just before I resigned from my newspaper. They had bought pro-government conglomerates. Said they had other interests in other sectors, so they bought it. And I resigned because it was not possible to do journalism there anymore. So they funded that company, and I know the project. That project actually was already completed when I was there years ago. So they kind of fooled Google, and they didn't even check. And they were, you know, they didn't even check who these people are. This is a pro-government company, very pro-government company, partisan company. So Google's image will be stained because of that. Check. So I think one of the problem is that when you are organizing information at scale on a global level, especially apart from the English language, they are so bad. I mean, their artificial intelligence is not good in quality. Right. That's why when you are searching something on Google right now in Turkey, whatever you search for Friday prayer, you search for COVID, you search for anything, and the top results are always these big pro-government media companies. Right. They are not even aware. I think they were not until recently, until we raised the issue with the IPI Turkey Dispatches article that had just been shared there. So they are now aware, but let's see how they will handle it, because handling it with only artificial intelligence, with the current capacity of artificial intelligence, especially in Turkish, I think it's not possible. They will need more human assessors. They have raters actually, but thousands of raters, but they don't use their feedback, I think, very effectively. It's only a small portion of how the algorithm is affected. And most of the thing comes from machine learning, which creates the current awful thing. So I say to my fellow journalists, if you can get some funds from Google or Facebook, as long as they do not, they are not involved in the editorial processes, they do not intervene, take it, because just think that it's a part of the, let's say, democracy tax that they should be paying for so long. 2 days ago, there was Mark Thompson, former New York Times CEO, here at the IPI World Congress. He also said that such regulation will probably be the only way of levying a tax, or in some other way, or just like Australia did. But the public should be really careful, because even in Australia, as Emily said, Google, for instance, is now saying that the total amount of economy in new searches is only 10 million Australian dollars. So they are definitely misleading the public. It's much more because they only count the completely news, content. But in Turkey, search engines are with the television. These two channels are the top two channels for people to be informed. And search is so popular. People are searching for something and incidentally landing on a news web page, because these news websites are also producing what they call SEO content. They are producing about everything. So the total economy is tens of millions of dollars, even in Turkey.
Right. I think there's just actually sort of a point that Emre made there, which I think is really worth picking up on, with it, which is to take the money and do good journalism with it. I think, I would add just a sort of a caveat to that, which is take the money, do good journalism with it, and tell people about it. So I think that there's a huge problem at the moment with a lack of transparency around what these influence kind of, and it's kind of interesting because they're very focused on helping local journalism in the US at the moment, because there's been a lot of PR kind of focus on the collapse of local journalism. But when we look at our spreadsheet, the number one recipient of Google and Facebook funding to, the tune of about $21 million over 5 years is the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, which is, it's an academic institution. It studies journalism. It's very, very, respectable and well-known institution. But necessarily in actual trouble in the same way. So you then look at the kind of and places like the Guardian, where I'm associated and I worked for a long time, and the FT and the Economist, they've all had significant amounts of money. That money is not going to those institutions to help save journalism on the ground. These influence building. I think we are not honest enough with ourselves as journalists about what that relationship really is. And it's led us to a point, I think, where we allow the platforms to dictate kind of talking points. It's like the talking point about there's no trust in journalism. I first heard, everybody knows that, right? But I first heard it sort of put forward as a problem we had to solve at Google Newsgeist. And it was like, it's kind of like, I think sort of we don't always recognize how our priorities are being manipulated. And when it came to, pivot to video, famously, which came directly from Facebook, that did real damage in newsrooms. It was a priority set by this powerful financial partner, which never materialized. And dozens, if not hundreds of people lost their jobs because of the failure to deliver on that. And I think that that's where we have to be really clear, which is we need much more transparency and accountability in those relationships.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I often, make jokes when I see some fundings. It's fundings for centers that study the center making their funding business models of future journalism centers. I do want to pose a kind of big picture, like you're out thinking question to you. But before that, I want to get to a question that came in from the chat from Julia Haas. And Imre, you touched on a little bit, so I'll pose it first to you, Emily, about artificial intelligence, right? What role does AI play in all of this? I mean, AI could be another quantum leap forward if you think about it in terms of like the impact of tech on news. So do you think it exacerbates the challenges you mentioned, or can it be an opportunity for improvement, for diversity and inclusiveness?
It's a great question, right? Which is it can be both, but it entirely depends on how it is built and how it is implemented and what guardrails we have around it. The thing that worries me about this is, again, Google is very much pushing the do more with less agenda in journalism and sponsoring AI projects around that. And it skips over a fundamental problem, right? Which is, which communities deserve human accountability, So it's great that you can now report on courts that would otherwise not have local journalists in, because there's an automated, it's not really AI, that's just an automated templating kind of scripting type project, but it's part of this move to be able to, do things more intelligently with fewer people. But actually it's really important that you have human beings in courtrooms to witness the first step of the criminal justice system. And Google's kind of response to it is we have to have more reporting but not, we can't have more reporters in courtrooms, so we have to automate that. That's a very, very sort of techno market centric view of what is the role here? You know, what role does journalism provide in the community? So I'm all for the intelligent ways that we can build paywalls, you know, the kind of tracking that doesn't leak too much data, that helps personalize or make, you know, kind of editorial more relevant to readers. I'm all for any number of AI applications that take some of the kind of, you know, that do make it easier to kind of work with fewer resources in the newsroom. But I'm really, really skeptical about, A, is this being built really with in mind? Is it really being built with news audiences and journalists in mind? Or is it a set of technologies actually that we should be deeply skeptical about? Because again, they can be just as easily used by bad actors as they can by people. In fact, they can be more easily used by bad actors than they can by people who have ethics and principles, etc. And we need to have that conversation as journalists about what are the kind of right ethical protocols. You know, what should we be doing as newsrooms before saying, thank you, Google, yes, we will take your money and we'll build this kind of AI and it's very, very exciting. You know, I wish I was more excited by it. I kind of see many more of the sort of bad applications of it at the moment than I do the good applications. But maybe it's a field where we could have more of an independent view and work not kind of as part of a marketing exercise for the platforms, but actually genuinely in a dialogue about what will work and what will not work when it comes to reporting and news distribution, personalization, advertising, etc.
Okay. I don't know, Imre, if you have anything to add to that. Otherwise, I've got another question lined up. But
well, as I said, I agree with everything, and I can add the problem with this stuff is actually a problem of scale, as I say, and organizing information at scale. And AI is part of that because of, you know, machine learning is mostly relies on databases. So, and these databases are like old stuff. Let's remember how the first AI revolutions happened. It was with chess, Go, etc. And from the 90s, how chess AIs started to beat the humans so easily. Because at first it was, people were teaching them the rules, teaching the software the rules, and the software was following the rules. Then they adopted that machine learning approach, which takes all past moves in the databases of all chess games, and from there it is making inferences and making better and better moves. It is making itself learn better moves without learning the rules itself. So here, when it's about, for instance, writing a story about a legal case, it will check all the past legal cases. Or when it is human resources, for instance, there have been so many stories published about this. When you are giving the AI the human resources capabilities, it is picking the white man, etc. It is racist because it's been the past experience in most of the countries with most of the biggest companies. For search engines, there is a good book that I can recommend, Algorithms of Oppression by Safiya Umojanoglu. It is showing with examples how search engines reinforce racism because it is on scale and engagement. So it is bringing us to the tyranny of the majority, I think. But journalists should not be part of the tyranny of the majority. We should be raising our voices for the weak, for the minorities. And when it doesn't happen in Turkey right now with the Google searches, for instance, when I searched a few months ago the word Jew, it was bringing completely anti-Semitist conspiracy theories. Why? Because it's published by a government, small fringe pro-government media company, brought by Google to millions of Turks. Although normally they will be read just by 10,000 people who read their print newspapers, Google brought it to the top.
Cool. Okay, so I want to go back to something that Emily said, which is that these platforms can kind of set the talking points. And again, pivot to video is a really obvious one. They had a product, a feature that they basically wanted everybody to use, and they kind of shoved that down everybody's throats, and it had disastrous things. That your point, Emily, about the lack of trust in media is interesting. That you see that as a talking point that has emerged from platforms, because I can see that. I actually hadn't thought about it, but it does seem like from their perspective, yes, that seems like both a problem from their lens, and also is a nice out for them of like, oh, well, the problem is the trust in media. So let's run with it. It's almost like a fake news, but with the veneer of we're Silicon Valley kind of ring to it. I want to play off of that with a question that came in from somebody in the chat. I think I lost the name of the Rick Zednick. Which is how do you see the platforms potentially changing the talking points or the way that people, consumers, have media literacy, right? And the development of young people as critical, right? Because again, platforms become their main conduit of getting media. Again, it's very emotional based. It's very much about identity creation. And in some respects, I think what we have is not just a news problem, but a human problem.
Right.
And to what extent do you think platforms or media can challenge, or actually not challenge? How can news organizations or media use the reality of new media literacy that is coming, or like, is there a judo flip that can happen? I'll pose that to both of you.
I think it's a hard. I think this is a hard one. I think that kind of one area where I might give the platforms a break. Actually, I'm not sure I would, and news a break as well, is to say in America, you have historically low performance at the moment of basic education, basic healthcare, and you huge income disparity between the top of society and the bottom. And so when we talk about kind of things like helping literacy, et cetera, kind of one of the things that's missing is a unified and high quality education kind of for everybody. What's missing is access to, there are some basic things, I think, which help media literacy, because, you can't have a kind of a shared worldview until you have a kind of a shared experience, right? And one of the things that is a little maddening about the platforms is that they have set up this fight against misinformation as being, to me, it's like the war on terror. They have framed this fight as a thing that a fact check bad actors out of existence. They're gonna, and it's sort of, they can help because this is the interface that everybody is seeing every day, right? But they start from this kind of whack-a-mole perspective of there are bad actors out there and we're going to fight them, we're going to beat them. That's not going to happen. We are going to continue to be surrounded by commercial and political messages which are misleading and unhelpful, and in some cases, kind of really, really damaging. And I think the education for that can happen on the platforms, and it should be happening through high quality reporting. I don't think we think nearly enough about news design, things that you've thought about, Dave. I'd love to hear what you think about this. Just like, how do you design news to really inform people and say change their behavior in a pandemic? I've heard so much about misinformation around the coronavirus. I have not heard a single person from a platform give a decent sort of discussion of what information design looks like that actually helps or is effective. My students, when we look at this as a reporting problem, say, what can we do to help? A journalist from Belgium emailed me the other day saying, QAnon's going to turn up here. What should our strategy be to stop these things? And so I think that, we're kind of a long way behind on the positives of that. And literacy could be part of those positives. But we have to slightly this ridiculous kind of notion that we are going to successfully fight misinformation. We have to kind of think about how can we positively make people exactly. You need to positively make people think that they do have a bit more agency over the kinds of information that they have and how they use it.
Yeah, I think I agree with Emily, and digital information literacy, let's say, or digital media literacy, I think should be taught starting from primary schools. Our current curriculums in most of the countries are based on stuff from the 19th century, all the classes, etc. There are some good examples in some countries, of course, but most of them are like that, including Turkey, and it's so focused on problem solving. And then what happens when you don't see that there is a problem? This is the problem, I think. So we need to teach young people to see the problems on digital media, especially in a more easier way to solve it. And several research about the trust. I'm currently having a PhD at Galatasaray University in Istanbul, and I'm focused on public trust, building of public trust through digital interfaces. So I'm doing some work in this area, and the stuff that I read so far, some of them are, for instance, saying that the current distrust in media is actually the result of not the older journalists, let's say, all journalists, but because of the content boom, because everybody is a content producer and people are thinking that everyone is a news outlet almost. And there are things like copycat outlets. So they are, imitate CNN International, seeing it in your feed on Facebook. And one research was saying that people who trust in media are more likely to check that even this is enough. When you are seeing something on social media, check from Google. It's kind of interesting. So what social media platforms and Google and other search engines do is really important for the sphere. The public should be aware of these companies because they are profit motivated. They can turn the public sphere into a commercial only zone easily, but at the same time they are governments as well, they are states as well, because if they let the states, they can turn it into a prison so easily because of national security, etc. So this balance, of course, they are part of us, they are part of the public, companies are part of the public, and the states are part of the public. Both of them are run by individuals, but the democratic individual, let's say, the democratic public individual should be aware on both levels. And I definitely agree that this should be taught from really young ages.
I'm going to try and ask a rapid fire question here, and then maybe have time for something. Answer this in as close to one sentence as you can, even though it's that'll probably it's the new option. Helena asks, essentially about breaking them up. Do you think breaking these companies up is an option that we should pursue as close to a yes or no as you think you can get?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Emre?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. All right, so back to something a little bit more broader, which, Emily, again, you got me thinking about something I often say: all code is political. And I often think that, in terms of information structure, the CMS, the content management system, is your first editor. And Facebook, Twitter, all of these, they're public CMSs. And as a result, they are publicly editing. They're editing the public, essentially, and editing publishers as well, who prefer, traditionally to have their own processes separate. The high-minded question, and again, we've only got like a few minutes here, but I often say there's this future where tech companies and media companies are indistinguishable from each other. I don't think we're there yet. I think we do kind of make this distinction, but I do see this future where they are indistinguishable. I think the New York Times, the new CEO even said, we want to become more like a tech company. And tech companies, which, started off as like, think about Apple, right? We make hardware, we make computers. Even they dabble in media, not necessarily journalism, but they sell media, they sell books and movies and TVs. So, if you keep that in mind, we're looking into a kind of mirror. Granted, it's a funhouse mirror. It's a mirror where we're seeing something we don't like. But I think there are certain things that we are going to have to accept and work with. And media is going to have to, there's this collision course, and what comes out of it, again, will be something that, it will be messy, but after that, there is no turning back. And I do think there are elements of media. What's exciting about it is we're in this position where we get to decide practices from traditional journalism we want to keep. I often use this metaphor. I'll skip the long metaphor of the Jews actually Egypt, right? They didn't have time they were leaving the new, and they didn't have time for the bread to rise. They said that's not important. We'll take matzah, but we do want to keep the Torah, right? So even though it's this 50-pound heavy on our back. So what are the things we need? What are the things that we cannot let go of? During this 20-year phase, we've decided that there are certain things that we're comfortable with changing. Innovation, a buzzword for such a long time because it was like new and exciting, and what can we change? What can we do different? And I've been a part of that. I questioned the unit, the article as a unit of news itself, right? Like I was basically saying the inverted pyramid. But there are certain things that I'm sure we would want to hold to our chest and keep forever. So in this crazy future, again, we've only got like 2 minutes, but what are the things that you think we cannot let go of in this collision course where we end up indistinguishable from big tech?
So two things. Report at the end of the day, news organizations are reporting organizations, and I think we lost sight of that, and it can be aggregation, it can be sort of user experience, etc. Yeah, fine. You have to have high quality reporting, and doesn't mean that we have the right people doing all the right reporting all the time, but we've seen what happens when reporting goes away. Corruption rises. And I think that we don't talk about that nearly enough, which is where are we going to get the reporters from? It's not just about creating more stuff. It's about getting stories out, holding power accountable, creating a public record. So that's one thing. And then the second thing, which I just think, again, is a little bit overlooked, is I really think about the weakening and diminution of journalistic institutions. I think you need institutional memory and strength and collectivism in journalism to really be able to carry those big and important stories against governments, against history, etc. And I think it's so important that we have organizations like the IPI and networks like the ICIJ, which have emerged from this era as like new things. But I really worry about institutional weakness, where people fold because of legal threats, etc. What I would like to keep is the idea that we need to have institutional collective strength, and we shouldn't be atomized and kind of turned into individual content producers, influencers, whatever.
Imre, quick thoughts?
Yeah, for media companies, I think first of all, technology had always been media technology had always been a part of media itself from the start. When IPI was founded around the same time, founded at the Columbia University, around the same time, my former newspaper, Hürriyet, was founded in Turkey. And in 2 years, it became the most successful Turkish newspaper. And until it was still the best newspaper. And why it was so successful in the first years? Because of its technology, actually, because of its printing machine, which was cutting edge at that time, and it was printing the first color sports photographs in Turkey, mostly sports news. But at the same time, as Emily said, it was also it was the only Turkish newspaper having foreign bureaus and sending to the Olympics its own reporter, so original reporter. That's why it should stick to both sides, original reporting, but this reporting should be under the journalistic principles, accurate, independent, impartial, and humanity is very important. I think humanity and accountability, because these things cannot be seen in artificial intelligence and other stuff. So this is our strength as journalists. But at the same time, technology will always remain important remember that modern journalism started with the railroads and telegram and such stuff. So Washington Post, for instance, is having its own CMS being marketed to other publications as content management systems. So both sides should be balanced, and I think I'm quite optimistic that in the next decade, the public should solve most of the problems that we see right now, and sooner or later we will protect them in Turkey.
We only 1 minutes over, which I count rounding down on time. Jackie, I don't know, or anybody else from IPI has any closing thoughts or things to say?
Yeah. Look, thanks so much, all of you. What a fascinating conversation. And I must say, I thought I knew a bit about this space, and I don't know about the rest of the people who are watching, but I'm not sure whether I should be more informed or actually made. So thank you very much, Emily and Emre, for joining us this afternoon.